Good evening, Miss Polly.
Good evening. How are you?
Holding it? Are you holding it down for us in the Northwest or the Midwest, I should say?
Yeah, for now. The weather's not horrible today. It went from super hot a few weeks ago to fucking freezing to appropriate.
Yeah, I had a rather lovely day in my convertible, but then I ate some pasta and I was reading something and I kind of my body kind of gave out. I don't know. I don't know if anyone's had that experience in middle age where you're just you're working on something and then you just pass out. But
Yes, a lot.
but yeah, I guess that's what it is means to be in your mid 30s. But I don't know. I look back at my youthful, silliness, and I miss it. But the plan is to get a young wife. That's the current plan, and to just parasite off of her. So if you're interested, just let me know, ladies. Also, old wives can also apply. Um, so what should we say today? I mean, there's so many things going on. It's hard to know where to begin. Anything in particular struck your fancy, Polly? It's unfortunate that Mr. Emmer is not speaker, but I thought the speech that or that video that Richard posted of Mike Johnson actually having charisma. I mean, what was that about? That was kind of interesting. I enjoyed that. I was ready for it. But we need that. We need that right there. He needs to represent us Johnsons well out there in the world.
I'm disappointed still that Emmer got shot down.
Now, Emmer got
Or
knifed in the back by Herr Trump.
yeah,
I mean, I was counting the votes as that went down, and he just the Israelis came over and they were like, "We can't have Tom Emmer be speaker," and he was like, "Oh, I guess it's not going to be Tom Emmer," and then knifed Tom Emmer in the back after talking with him the day before, which is pretty crazy. If you just think about it.
well, and then all the Republicans that were making such a fuss about Jim Jordan were like, "Hey, no, this Mike Johnson's great. Let's go that route. He seems he seems normal." I think Adam Kinzinger said that. What did he say? That Mike Johnson is Jim Jordan in drag.
Yeah, I don't know what to think of Adam Kinzinger. I heard he was basically on the payroll of the Israelis for a while, and that part of the deal of him resigning is that he's one of those guys who protests too much. He's one of those. He's all upset that he was districted out of his district. He's kind of a strange cat. Same thing with Liz Cheney. It's my grandmother was from Wyoming. That was not what represents Wyoming values. She launched her campaign for Wyoming, Congress from her condo in McLean or some shit. It's just get the fuck out of here. So I don't know. I'm just kind of I'm at this stage with a lot of these things where it's just I don't know. I think I'm against Trump, but I'm also against the people who are against Trump for cynical and selfish reasons. You know. So it's sort of a shame that we're saddled with all these people. You know.
The anti-antis are. If there's anyone I want to punch in the throat the most politically, it's the anti-antis.
Yeah, I'm not one of those. I think that requires too much commitment, and I'm not quite there. But I'm basically of the view that kind of our entire political class is kind of shitty in different ways. It's kind of just my general read on it. But anyway, so that's kind of how I'm approaching things. I saw that Blinken went to go meet some of the folks in Turkey, which is extremely encouraging. And it seems to me there's a lot of videos coming out about Turkish military power and Turkish military presence, which is something that I think people should spend a lot more time paying attention to than they do. No, in general, Rishi Sunak has a list of proposals ahead of the elections going on next year. I think pretty much all of those proposals are kind of dead on arrival within the UK context. So, in general, I think things are kind of moving along. They're moving in the right direction. I think we'll get a Labour government by certainly by this time next year, maybe even before then. And I think that will be very good for President Biden going into the 2024 election. And it seems pretty clear to me that Biden's going to win it. I don't know what people are talking about when they look at these like silly polls. If you look at the crosstabs on the polls, you find that like a lot of liberals are disappointed that he's not like liberal enough. I don't know. It's just funny. Like whenever I read these polls, people are like, "Oh, this poll says this," and it's like, "All right, well, let's fucking read this poll." And you open up the poll.
That's true. That I think that's true, Charles. But so
I mean, Richard, like just let me just finish the point. The point is like pretty
okay,
simple.
sure, go
Like
ahead.
you read the poll and it's like, "Oh, how is he doing among Democrats?" And they're like attacking him for being insufficiently left wing. and it's like, "Oh, all those people are all going to like stay home or vote for Trump? Like get the fuck out of here." Like I don't know. It's hard to
I
believe.
definitely get that because you would have like low approval ratings, and the Democrats are like, he hasn't done enough with COVID, or he hasn't, canceled student loans or whatever. And yeah, they're faced with election day, and you have Trump on the ballot, and they're going to vote for Biden.
By the
Now
way,
there
I
is
think they're right. By the way, if somebody were to ask me about Joe Biden, I would not give him high marks just because I want him to do better.
well, I would have defended him up until this past month, to be honest. I mean, I think he is squandering his legacy. He's leading us into a war in the Middle East. I mean, or allowing it to happen. But I would say this about the Trump thing: there's an asymmetry where it's like the girl with 200 grand in student loan debt who wants socialism or whatever, and so she hates Biden, but then election day she'll vote. But the asymmetry is that the Trump people would rather die than not vote for Trump. I mean, it's a very strong in terms of the base, the far right base, the MAGA base. So it's a very different dynamic. The other thing is that, like, it's weird. The last year of Trump's presidency was COVID, and that was very destabilizing. And there were all these protests, the BLM protests, that I think really arose out of COVID. Primarily, actually, people were locked in their homes for months, and they were
So
just sick
if you
of it.
gather in large groups, you can't get COVID, right? If you're fighting for social justice.
Well, right. It's the social justice that counteracts the virus. That's the
That's what
thing.
I
That's
do.
what you have to
I just
understand.
go out of the house and I just lather on the social justice, and I'm good to
Well,
go.
right. If you go to a rock concert in groups, then that will spread the COVID. But if it's for a good cause, then
That's right.
no.
Just like the best form of birth control is using a fake name, right? It's that
Right.
kind of thing, right? 100%. Yeah.
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 But those protests, they've been building for a while, and the conservatives aren't wrong when they're like, the BLM arose out of this general meme or vibe of the academic left over the past 25 years. I mean, yeah. And there are other reasons. COVID was a deep cause, a catalyst, but I think also kind of a major cause also. But the thing is, those were directed against Trump, and he was failing to deal with it successfully. And and it got a little bit out of hand, and Biden kind of pulled back, pressed on the brakes a little bit. And he's like, well, violence is never justified, and so on. But it was a kind of building antagonism against Donald Trump. This is the thing. Um, the war in Gaza, in my estimation, is going to get worse. They are going to kill the Israelis. That is, they're going to probably kill 20,000 children. And I don't even know what the death toll is going to be, but it's going to be just outrageous. And there are going to be protests against Biden going into an election. He is going to be facing down people attacking him. It's not good. It's demoralizing for his presidency. I do think, I mean, I know you're going to call me crazy, and that's fine because we can have a good, heated discussion on this. But I do think that Trump is going to win. And yes, you could say the deep state will never allow that to happen, or they're going to prevent it. Okay, but I I think there are just so many headwinds with Biden. I would defend him and his domestic policy quite a bit. Obviously, I care about NATO and Ukraine and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm not going to defend him anymore because this is going to be what he's going to be remembered for. He allowed Netanyahu to annex Gaza, kill 100,000 people or whatever the number is going to be, and basically displace probably 1 million Palestinians. That's going to be his legacy. And
I don't disagree with
I,
this, by the way. I mean,
I
I don't think it's going to be that many people, but I do agree that, look, I mean, he's of an older generation, and the older generations do not understand Israel like the younger ones do.
the boomer
So
truth regime, as academic agent calls it's, I think a lot of people think of it as liberal or something. It's biblical. Like they're attached to
I think it's both
some
it's biblical on
Old
the right.
Testament stories.
It's biblical on the right, and it's on the left. It's kind of more like they view the Israelis as oppressed, the Jews as oppressed because of World War II
Right.
and the Holocaust. And like I don't really believe a lot of the stories around World War II. No, this is what it is. I'm not really willing to go that deep down that rabbit hole because every time I do, I get my dick cut off. It's an involuntary circumcision anytime I touch these issues. But you
Yeah.
know, my view basically is that Biden should have arrested Netanyahu when he was visiting the United States. There's lots and lots of evidence of criminal conduct he's been engaged in, and he has Jewish privilege. You know, if he were a brown or Hispanic world leader, or black Hispanic, or Hispanic world leader, he would be arrested when he came to the United States. But everyone's like, oh, he's a head of state, he's a this, he's a that. You know, we've had other examples of leaders that have misbehaved that have not been allowed in the U.S. He should never have been allowed. If he was going to be allowed in the U.S. at all, he should have been arrested when he came to the UN. You know,
On
um,
what grounds?
on the grounds of all the criminal stuff he's up to. I mean, the Arnon Milhan stuff is disturbing. Arnon Milhan was for years stealing nuclear secrets from the United States. He was propagandizing people through the film industry, you know, selling weapons to kill black people down in South Africa. That's sort of how he got the initial capital to be a film producer. And he's doing the 12 Years a Slave kind of like racial animus stuff that leads to George Floyd riots, sort of messing with the social harmony of the United States. You know, Fight Club, right? Every antisocial man you know has watched Fight Club and can quote
Yeah.
it. And and then he gets in trouble because he's bragging to the Israeli press about how he's a nuclear spy, and they just like cancel his visa, his 10-year visa, and then he goes and he basically, at Trump administration, he goes to Netanyahu and he says, Mr. Netanyahu, please, please, please help me. And they basically use the political leverage they had with John Kerry at the time. I think he was Secretary of State at the time, if I'm recalling correctly. And he gets to stay in the U.S., continuing his naughty behavior while Biden's vice president and all of this. And it's the Israelis that ultimately bring criminal charges against him, and they can't really seem to put him in jail because if he goes to jail, he's done. So what does he want? He wants another war. He wants another this. He wants another that. And this is an example of like what I'm talking about. Like generally, the kind of overall weakness about busting these Likud operations within the U.S. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
not acceptable anymore. It never was acceptable, but it's now like extremely unacceptable. So, when I see these like young people get out there and get in the faces of these politicians demanding a ceasefire or like, ripping down these posters, I agree with them 100%, and it's very obvious to me that, and I've written about this and talked about this as well, like that I too live under a kind of occupation as somebody who's a smart nerd that's been fucked with by the Israelis over the years. And if you read the James Bamford book, Spy Fail, there's Israeli operations that are caught all the time, and they're like given a strong talking to, and then sent back to Israel. Like they're never really prosecuted. They're never really dealt with in a meaningful way, and there's something very sick about that. And I think it's kind of like it's like maybe the original sin of America is slavery, but I would say countenancing oppressive regimes like the Israelis is a close second. You know, what is that old saw like? That's not who we are, right? Like, it's not. It's not who we are as a country. Like, we oppose tyrants, and here we are, basically like, oh well, it's the Jewish people, and like you got to be Team Jew, while they're like massacring children, and like so I was thinking about this the other day when I was in the grocery store of all places, and just thinking like, if I don't really like this grocery store, I can go to another grocery store. Or if I don't like the state, I can move across the country. Like, I have all these rights, all these things that I can do with my life as an American and as somebody who's relatively rich. I can basically do kind of whatever I want, more or less. And then I think to myself of like all these young Palestinian guys who participated in this operation. It's like maybe 3,000 of them. Like we don't really know the numbers, right? But we had like a whole bunch of them, and they've effectively since '06 lived in a kind of open air prison of Gaza. And here was an opportunity that they had to really like, their whole race, their whole culture, everything about them was about to be erased because there's about to be a deal cut between Saudi Arabia and Israel, like normalizing relations between these two barbaric regimes. And they were like, "Fuck this," you know, like let's fight this. Let's overturn this table. And I have to say, like, it doesn't take that much imagination for me to think that, like, if I were in a similarly situated environment, that I too would have 100% been behind that. And I 100% would have joined that kind of effort. And this like idea that like, oh well, if the Palestinians just lay down their arms, like they just renounce terrorism, right? And it's like, no, the second they do that, they're going to get steamrolled by the Israelis. Every single instance that we've seen of Palestinians leaving their homes, and hell, even when they're still in their homes in the West Bank, the Israelis come in and they just steal from them and take from them. And I personally have experienced a very similar thing in the United States with companies that I've invested in or backed or whatever being targeted by the Israelis, being harassed by them, having my, you know, computer equipment hacked, having them try to set me up with crimes, all kinds of other bullshit that they're up to. And honestly, at a certain point, like you have to just kind of ask yourself, like, anytime there's an anti this and anti that, these things don't just crop up for no reason, right? Like Raoul Dahl said it best when he was talking about the 1982 Lebanon War. He's like, I'm not an anti-Semite. I'm anti-Israel, and increasingly, even the Israeli left, such as it is, the settler population keeps ticking up, 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 and we're just supposed to be like, oh well, it's an unfortunate, complicated thing. It's really not. Like they're cleansing an area that they want to control, and because a lot of them have allies in the United States, we go along with it, and we shouldn't. We should stop doing that. And if Biden loses the presidency over it, maybe he deserves that. You know, what's worse?
100%.
What's
That's
worse
what
to
I
me? What's worse to me
we've
is that
just got to get over this moment in time in which Zionism has some sort of legitimacy. We've just got to move past it.
do you know what to me
And
the funny thing about it is though? Like I've been thinking about this a lot, right? And in a way, the Hamas Israel fight and the Ukraine Russia fight are kind of opposites of each other in terms of US policy, right? Because
yeah,
here are a group of people known as the Palestinians who are stateless, who want a state, like they want a community, right, that's theirs, just like the Ukrainians, right, who want a community that's theirs. They're willing to fight for it, they're willing to die for it, they're willing to sacrifice their children for it. Okay, which hitherto has been kind of something that even the Ukrainians are like sending their kids out of the conflict zones, right? They're getting rid of their women and children so that they can fight in these areas. And so, however you feel about the Ukraine conflict, and I know that, like, we have differences of opinion, people in this space, and it's fine, whatever. But the point is, the whole raison d'etre of the conflict, right? The whole like idea of like being a people, um, you know, I think to some extent, like it's kind of weak sauce to basically always defend the Israelis. Now, I hear all kinds of things going on behind the scenes and this, that, and the other thing. Um, but imagine if Biden had got up there and he'd been like, "I said no malarkey, and I'm tired of all this Israeli malarkey, and fuck around and find out." Imagine if he had just said that.
He would be reelected.
He would be
This is
reelected in a landslide. Like, I would personally like max out to him like the second he said such a
because
thing.
all of the like biblical maniacs are MAGA people. Like the Venn diagram of the religious right, Christian Zionist, and MAGA, it's like three circles. There's some separation, to be honest. I think MAGA is
No,
something
it's a solid
somewhat.
circle. They're stacked on top.
Yeah, that's basically what I'm saying. I'm just being reasonable here. There is a little bit of difference there. Like the MAGA people, like bringing in new voters, et cetera. There's a little bit, but the overlap is tremendous, and they're never going to vote for a Democrat ever if their life depended on it. So why bother catering to them or pandering to them? And it's
Well, I
like
think we know
all
what's
of
really
these.
going on here, right? What we're doing is we're allowing a lot of liberal Jews in America to believe a fiction that the Israeli state is redeemable, that it is defensible, right? We are allowing them to live in a fantasy land, right, where
Yeah.
they can have a kind of dual loyalty to the United States and to this Israeli state, or at least a sympathetic kind of sense of themselves in the relation to the Israeli state. And it's a lie. Like, it's not true. Like, it's just not. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I understand that you went to Birthright and like you stooped some hot Israeli chick, and like that was fun, and they let you fire the Galils, and maybe you had some hummus and some, whatever, falafel. But like, your fantasy and your fantasy world that you want to live in does not come at my safety, right? And does not come at the safety of like the world, right? And that's kind of what we're doing, is we're basically saying we're encouraging a lot of liberal Jews basically that they can live in a fantasy land, that they can basically believe in this country of Israel, and that they can always potentially live in Israel if things get really dicey in America. And it's like, no, they can't. Sorry. Your job is to basically work to making America a better place to live in, and the world a better place to live in. Like, tikkun olam, like we actually believe it when you say that, right? And then there's this like racism, this like endemic racism to Israeli society that is like so countervailing against all of the forces that are like currently marshaled around the world, right? Like, we're trying to do what we can to make amends with the Native Americans in the United States. We're trying to do what we can to like make black people feel more comfortable in corporate America. We're trying to do what we can to make sure that the Asians are treated well, even though the Chinese government like gave us all COVID and is up to some like really shady shit. But we're trying to be like, oh, we don't want to be racist against the Chinese. That would be against our values. We're trying to make the Mexicans and the illegal aliens feel comfortable, and so that they can at least work with the police. And so we're trying to do all these things, trying to humanely treat these. And then you look at like what's going on in Israel, and like, there are all these, apartheid rules. There's these highways that you can only go on if you have the right car. You can only walk down this path if you have the right ethnicity. If your mother, if you're not religious, they'll ask you what religion your mother was if you want to visit certain temples or whatever. And if you don't know, they'll ask you your grandparents, and so on and so on and so on. So there's like all this bullshit that basically we tolerate, and for this alliance. And like, what the fuck do we get from being close to the Israelis? I mean, I
I
know.
look, I've seen some of these like liberal or left-wing realist accounts. I was actually gonna go through one in entirety on my show tomorrow at 2
No,
p.m.
but I'm
Eastern
I'm being
time.
like
But,
I'm being
I
serious.
know, no, I know. I'm
Like,
sorry for the extended setup. And they're basically saying that like Zionism, it's all a canard. It's really about Western imperialism, and we want to inherently create chaos in the Middle East so that the Arabs won't unite against us or something. I mean, it's just this
but I
incoherent
don't see any
argument.
evidence that that's even true. Like most of the Arabs I know,
It's
like,
obviously not true. Like the Arabs, first off, they will sell, like, clearly, evidently, they will sell the world oil. Like, wow, shocking revelation. Secondly, the one way to unite the Arab world is to fuck with them and create chaos. Like, it's just a level of human nature. I mean, there is no benefit whatsoever. If there were like
by
an
the way,
American military
if
base
the
there,
Arab world were united, why would that be bad for the United States?
it wouldn't necessarily be bad for the United States, and it might be good for Arabs too, right? It's
Yeah.
easier to deal with like a big block of countries than it is to deal with, a half, dozen, countries that all have their own foreign policy. It's this like assumption that there are these like evil psychopaths who like want chaos in order to take stuff. And you can find examples of that. I mean, there's supposedly some, gas reserves in, and they're fighting over this. But again, it's just easy. Like it's just easier to deal with a united Arab front. I mean
Yeah. And
that's a
also,
good
like,
thing.
let's be real. Like, the Arabs have more to offer than the Israelis do, right? Like, they have oil, they have a huge population. Many of them speak English. Many of them, like us, notwithstanding our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And their population is inching upwards in the United States. Like, that's clearly what all these Israelis are freaked out about with Rashida Tlaib and with Ilhan Omar and all these other like Muslims that are getting elected to Congress and being engaged politically. And it's like I deal with some of the Arabs. I get invited to some of their embassy parties here in DC, and like I have a great time at these parties, right? Like, they're fun to be around. They like don't really. They're kind of much more less annoying than some other groups of people out there. Their food is pretty good. Their women are decently attractive. I don't know. Like, I feel like we could cut a deal with a lot of them.
Yes.
And the problem I have with all this stuff is that, like, literally there's a bunch of crazy fundamentalists. And by the way, they're not even Bible readers. Like, this is the thing that I have been like seeing a lot with the Trump people, is that they have this idolatrous worship of Israel and the Israeli state. And they don't really know anything about the history. They don't really know anything about the culture. And these people are encouraged and like, by petro interests, and they're encouraged by kind of this like criminal syndicate that wants higher and higher oil prices to basically destabilize the world. And honestly, like, my attitude right now is like, fuck getting rid of the Palestinians. Like, let's get rid of the Israelis. Like, let's just be like, let's move them to different
Well,
parts of the world.
right. I mean, this is the thing. It's like this whole LARP of, first off, that there is any real reason to believe that like there's historicity to the Bible is just ridiculous. I mean, you might as well just go
Even if the
read.
Bible were
Hold on,
true,
hold on,
who
hold on.
cares?
Let
Yeah,
me continue this.
yeah.
I agree with that sentiment, but like, there's no historicity to the Bible. I mean, like the evidence people have for like David's kingdom is like some coin someone dug up. Like, the large body of evidence is that if there was some sort of Jewish statelet, it was like an olive growing. I mean, olives were actually very important in that ancient world. It was like almost oil is today, but it was oil, in fact. But anyway, it was a little statelet, and they created this literature upon that. And that's not a land grant, like, don't know what to say. I mean, it's kind of like, I don't know, an Englishman saying that we should go back to Denmark because that's where Hamlet's from. Or it's imbecilic, and it's like this LARP of this like real nation of Israel, or whatever. It's like you were created by the UN, And I think we should probably uncreate. I mean,
And
like
by
if the UN,
terrorism in the UN, right?
yeah, by attacking the
Assassinations.
British Empire. So like we can uncreate, we can cancel this country because it was established by the United Nations. Thus, like the world can come together to cancel Israel. And again, it's the idea of this armed state that is at the end of the day, and I'm sure there are plenty of secular minded, totally reasonable and decent Israelis, and they don't, I mean, look, they have blood on their hands in the same way that you and I have blood on our hands. Like, I get, they're part of it on some level, but they're not actively supporting it. But like, the state is about recreating this thing they read in the Bible. Like, you cannot get away from like greater Israel as a project. Eretz Israel. Like, that's in there, that's inherent to what they're doing. And so like it's just inherently destabilizing and inherently unjust. And so like the Romans, like when they created Syria, Palestine, I mean, there was a capital city that was outside of Jerusalem. There were certainly Jewish communities even after 70 AD and subsequent revolts. There were Jewish communities there, but there wasn't like an armed Jewish state basically trying to, build the third temple and, bring upon the Messiah. And so it was kept in check.
And by the way, who cares? Even if there was all this stuff, like who cares?
Right. I mean,
I mean,
there's a lot of cool stories from every culture,
Yeah.
partly fictional,
and
partly
you know
true.
what? Like, if you can't defend your territory, you don't have your territory for much longer
Right.
in history.
But I just say the Roman solution for Palestine, just a large area that, I mean, maybe it's a transitionary solution, but just a large area. No one's being harmed by this. Like, Jews can be there. They can still go to Jerusalem and wail about, the temple, and act like lunatics if they want to do that. If they're so inclined to be embarrassing imbeciles and wait for the Messiah, then knock yourself out. Who am I to stop you? But you're not going to have an armed state that is bent on expansion. It's just like, this is not worth it. And you can't actually do it on your own. Your state was created by the UN. Your state is part
And defended
of,
by the United States.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
it's just
when they're killing all these people,
point,
they're using U.S. technology, right?
Right. You just have to get over this. Like, it's just, at some point you're like, yeah, no, we're not doing, I think the world is here. It's like, it's all the old people who, again, they have the Second World War and the Holocaust, and they've heard from their pastor that, God's chosen people and yada, yada, yada. But like everyone else, anyone who's intelligent or cultured, etc., thinks that this is just a complete farce. I mean, the only people who are, avidly pro-Israel are like knuckle-dragging rednecks. I'm sorry. I mean, I'm white, so I can criticize my own people. It's like,
Are they really our people, though, Richard? Are they really?
Well, they kind of are a race apart, but they are our people.
They are
like,
Scots-Irish in many cases.
Oh my God. Yeah. But like, I can criticize them. No, I'm able, it's like the guy who's like, only I pick on my little brother, well, I can criticize these people, but like, we cannot ever allow them to have any sort of decision-making capacity. And we've just got to tell them, like, dude, grow up. This is just such a stupid, inherently stupid endeavor. Like, it's just fucking embarrassing. I mean, those videos when you see of like going to the Wailing Wall, first off, there's no evidence that there's ever a first temple. And I mean, it's all just like literature. And second off, it's like, yeah, you guys engaged in rebellion against Rome, which is the greatest civilization of all time. You engage in all this like internecine feuds, and which led to 70 AD and the destruction of Jerusalem. It's like, I'm sorry, brother. Like, I genuinely am. I'm sorry. And it fucking happened. A lot of really terrible things happened in history. I could just list them all of just like fuck ups and selfish pride that led to destruction. I fucking get it. But you look like you are mentally disabled, like going up to a wall and like whining, basically, and like your Messiah is coming. Just shut the fuck up.
Bopping your head against it
Yeah,
over
it
and
is
over
so
and over
fucking
again.
embarrassing. I'm like, I also love this about how everyone wants to respect other religions. They're like, oh, all religions, it's so good. You know, it teaches us tolerance and oh, really? Really? Have you read the Old Testament? It teaches you tolerance. Really? Fascinating interpretation. I will suggest that you haven't read a verse of that book. If that's the lesson you think, you
Well, they
learn
can't read,
from it.
Richard. They can't read, right? I mean, this is the truth of the
Yeah.
matter: is that many of these
Yeah,
people.
and so you're an imbecile. You are a fanatic. It's collective insanity. Insanity in individuals is rare. In groups, it's large. And you are embarrassing yourself. You're embarrassing the whole human race by acting like this. Like that all of that shit that they are obsessed with is some of the dumbest fucking nonsense I have ever seen in my life. Civilized
And it's
people
hilarious
don't
watching
act
our
like
politicians prostrate themselves, right? Our politicians
that.
prostrate themselves at this like fake wall, where they put on the
Oh,
fake hat.
the Messiah is coming. Oh, I mean, like, what are you? Are you like literally four? Like, I mean, it's just at some point you're like, we're not doing this. You don't get to genocide people on behalf, A. But B, even if you were totally peaceful, you're stupid. And like, we're grown-ups here, and we don't believe in these dumb fairy tales. I mean, all of these criticisms go for Muslims too. I mean, I have to be honest here, but like, we don't actually believe in your nonsense, okay? And like, you're embarrassing the human race. And so we're just kind of stopping it. Like, if you want to have your like extremist religious community somewhere, like, okay, bro, go for it. But you're not going to like drag the rest of the world into your nonsense. I mean, and again, I don't think that my opinions here are like particularly outrageous at this point. They might have been at some point where I'm just like a shrill atheist and, blah, blah, blah. I don't think it's outrageous. I think the whole world is looking at this and like, what in the actual fuck?
Yeah,
Well, the
and
Europeans. Oh, sorry, Charles. Go ahead.
I think a lot of religious people also share your view. Like, I mean, I'm
At
nominally some,
least, yeah,
I'm
exactly.
nominally some sort of Christian, and like I don't really regard um, the Holy Land as necessarily all that holy or all that deserving of my respect or attention.
No, I mean, look, I would defend, Christianity to the point that like you make it abstract and you, yeah, I mean, like you have a newer conception of God, and it's not this just utter fanaticism and literalism. It's just like you can imagine like what a Messiah might be, or what an Antichrist might be, or whatever. Like you can kind of think about it in a literary way, and you can kind of think about the Eucharist in an abstract way. I mean, that's like it's called It's called being civilized, just being educated. Like if you believe in this stuff, I'm sorry, if you believe in this stuff, you're an idiot. And so I'm not going to get blackmailed by all this like religious tolerance that people have. Like, oh, we've got to respect everyone's religion. It's so beautiful. No, it's not actually. It's like worthy of the dustbin. All right? Like educated, intelligent people don't believe this. And what, you think I'm crazy? Look at every like fucking study. Like it's only dumb people who believe this literalist nonsense to begin with. And it's generally intelligent people who are able to move beyond it. And like the fact that they think they can just do this because they like believe in it so much or whatever. I mean, at some point, we've just got to just call them on their bullshit. Call them on their bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with what you're saying. I hoped
Richard,
that Joe Biden would be the guy to do it, to be honest with you.
He's just too old.
well, I mean, but about the Israel thing, I think we can see a shift already in Europe, and I just very quickly put in the jumbotron a demographics map. By 2050, the European population, it's going to be radically different than what it looks like now. 14% Muslim in the continent. Germany almost 20%, UK 17, France 18, Sweden 30. I mean, they're going to have a political shift here. They're not going to inherently they won't be as supportive of the Israeli project anymore because of the population shifts and who's coming in. So, I mean, that's going to be a major factor, don't you think? If the Europeans no longer sort of support that.
There's no question. I mean, I don't know. I guess you could call it an unintended consequence because there is a lot of crossover. I mean, the Netanyahu people are doing business with the Euro right. It's like, oh, let's promote Orban, let's promote all these guys, and they're pro Putin, they're pro Israel, all that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of crossover in terms of Jews in promoting mass immigration, etc. So I mean, it's a kind of I don't know. I mean, it's a kind of I don't know. I don't know how like hardcore I want to go in this, but I mean, if you read Genesis, if you read Genesis, like it's all very curious, isn't that whole book, Genesis? I wonder if like I rage against fundamentalists, yet I've actually read the Bible. I mean, it's kind of
Yeah, they don't read.
interesting.
I mean, they don't read.
When
This is why you and
yeah,
I always get in fights about this because, like, you actually take them seriously, and
yeah,
they're
I
not.
do take it. I show it more respect than they do,
Yeah,
arguably.
and you know what? Like, it's like I'm sorry, but like they don't even really believe in their sky friend, right? Like, that's not really what they believe. What they believe
Well,
in,
he's not a sky friend.
right? I mean,
He's a volcano god. I mean, how many more hints do you need? He appears as fire. I mean, he's
yeah,
Vulcan,
but it doesn't
basically.
matter. Like, all of that shit's
Yeah.
fake, right? So, like, the point is, what it's really about is it's about things in the here and now, right? It's about who's got the tanks, who's got the guns, who's got the water, who's got the oil, who's got the shit, right? And like that's really what's going on here. And what has happened is that you just look at the numbers and how like readily transferable our government just ships over all this money to these fucking savages who then go and murder a bunch of Muslims and children and whatever. And we're supposed to be like, oh yeah, they're our greatest ally, and it's like, no, they're not. Like they steal our technology, they target our people in the United States and elsewhere. It's like this is not up for debate anymore. Like this is not like 2001 or 2002, and like their brand is so weak. Like the whole point of being pro-Israel is like, oh well, they're really good on security. It's like, oh really? They couldn't really secure themselves from Gaza, could they? Right? So there's just like there's nothing they have that we want. You know?
How did BB not like
Who's with the
foresee
plane?
this coming? Because you have to admit, all of this is going
Oh,
to
he clearly saw it coming.
hurt Israel, though. Like
No,
it.
no, it's not hurting Israel. It's hurting. It's helping him. He doesn't give a fuck about his people. Why would he give a fuck about his people? They're about to put him in jail for being a criminal.
But that's the thing. Like this, everything he's doing here, all of his failures surrounding this, like that is going to increase the calls for his head. And I mean, it's just
But it's like Trump.
it's
He's did all these indictments. There's a Damoclesian sword hanging over his head. So he's gonna go to war and put himself in a position where, at the very worst, he'll be remembered as a flawed hero, and at the very best, he'll perpetuate his regime indefinitely because it's wartime. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. I mean, the strategy that he's using is good. Not morally, but definitely strategically. And yeah, but like as I was saying, I mean the like the whole Jewish story is about like going places and like being feared and kind of like people getting annoyed with them and then kicking them out and then hiding and then resurfacing. I mean, it's like the story of Abram and Sarai when Yahweh tells them to go to Canaan and they go there and lo and behold, there's a plague in Canaan and they upon their arrival, and then they go to Egypt, and Abram, the forefather of nations, this great man we're supposed to admire, he's like, hey, Sarai, you're super hot, so why don't I say that I'm your brother, and then I won't get killed, and the other men can, gawk at you. Kind of a weird strategy. Doesn't quite make sense. Lo and behold, the beautiful Sarai, whose name means princess, goes and gets with the Pharaoh over in Egypt. And then, lo and behold, another plague comes. And the Pharaoh puts two and two together. And he was like, look, you've been pimping out Sarai to all these guys, including myself, and I've given you all this money and camels. And he's like, just be gone with you. You brought the plague, effectively. And they go again. I mean, it's this story just over and over and over again. It's like it's a certain type of strategy that's embedded in the Bible. And again, I just don't understand how people can't read it and understand what's happening. I mean, Exodus as well. Like it's a revolting slave population, and the Pharaoh's like, I can't have these people around anymore. And then, lo and behold, Yahweh, the all loving, wonderful God, murders the firstborn of everyone outside of the Hebrew community. I mean, this book does not teach tolerance, and it's not holy. It's a certain type of strategic technology that can be used in certain ways for a certain type of people. But I mean, vis-a-vis the adversaries of people who follow this book, it's fairly toxic. And I don't know what to say about this, but like all of these stories, everything that we're seeing now is like you can find it in the Bible. And it's like it's set up for them. There's a strategy to it. There's ways of getting out. There's periods of hiding and etc. And it's just, I mean, it's predictable. It's predictable.
No, I mean, you aren't wrong. I personally am a person of faith, but I like a little reasonability within my faith, and frankly, none of this stuff in Israel and Palestine would be happening if not for religion. And I do think that if you look at history and if you read any religious book, it's very much it's population control, and really, it's getting people to be adherent to a specific, way of existing, and it's it's cost the world how many lives.
Mm-hmm. I mean, religions, and it's necessary. It's an existential quality of who we are as humans. But it's like we can have other religions.
I mean, one would argue that Christianity was kind of the improvement on the whole Old Testament thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be my position. But
I take Nietzsche's position. Like
Richard and I are not going to agree, and we're probably not going to come to a conclusion.
Nietzsche was basically saying that, like, at the least you can say about the Old Testament, it's pretty badass.
I mean, I would certainly watch a movie of the Old Testament much more readily than I would watch a movie of the New Testament. That's
right.
Sort of my argument about it.
Right.
But the point remains, though, like, this is not really about. I mean, it's about religion, but it's really not about. It's not like, Bibi is like some great religious man. I mean, he's. You saw the piece that came out today about the Israelis, being involved with, like, Israeli gangs being involved with the drug trade with Colombia. right? Like there's this whole nexus of criminals and Israeli criminals that are connected with the Israeli state operating with impunity in the Western Hemisphere. These people are just criminals. They're like thugs and criminals and gangsters. And, this is what they are and who they are. And of course, Bibi's going to kill a shitload of Palestinians he doesn't regard as human beings rather than face the music for his own criminality. Right? I mean, it's not that
Yeah.
complicated. And because none of the Israelis are actually tough enough or decent enough, they don't have the courage to do the ultimately correct thing, which is to assassinate him.
Well, I mean, I'm not. I think this train is out of the station, and
God, Richard, are you being attacked by birds? What does that sound?
they're not birds. So my son has been like
Guinea
badgering
pigs?
me. They're guinea pigs, yes. He's been badgering me for like a year to get guinea pigs, so I finally gave in. And I have to say, I was very worried about getting guinea pigs, but they're actually kind of fun.
But Richard, they're nocturnal. Do they keep you up?
No, I'm a pretty sound sleeper. But they get excited when they think I'm about to give them like some more celery or whatever. And I don't know.
I ate guinea
They're
pigs
just
when I
funny.
was last in South America. I ate guinea pigs, so they're delicious.
What?
In case you change your opinions on them,
Well, maybe if I get, I don't know
if
if I get
if
really
they mistreat you, just let me know. I have some good recipes I can send you.
just roast a guinea pig over the fire, put some barbecue sauce. This is cruel.
Well, Charles, I wanted your take on Joe Biden green lighting $320 million worth of munitions for Israel just today. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, he's imperiling his presidency anytime he does this shit. I know, Dana and I and others might disagree on this, but my support of Joe Biden is not like uniform, right? Like it's contingent on certain things, right? And one of those things it's contingent upon is that he actually takes out the trash. And if he can't take out the trash, there are others that will do that in the Democratic Party. I don't know. Like I'm looking at there's a number of people who have surprised me with their calls for a ceasefire. I never thought that Dick Durbin, who was the first recruit of AIPAC, would be like, yeah, this is fucking disgusting. Like, this is wrong.
Yeah.
And yet here he is, So there's a lot of that going on right now, which I'm actually quite heartened by. I'm also just deeply disappointed in Fetterman. Fetterman,
Were you surprised by that? I mean, he's like a listless vessel.
He's like subhuman.
Well, I mean, I know his wife, and his wife is actually pretty good on these issues. And she's very Israeli skeptical, and I thought that his politics and her politics would be more in harmony.
Well, have you seen that monkey that paints pictures? Like there was this monkey.
You'll have to be more specific.
Well, an actual monkey, and he created art that I think is actually quite good and really interesting, and it shows that he's actually engaging, with the material and so on. But anyway, that's kind of how I feel about Fetterman's statements. It's like, wow, it's fascinating. Like a monkey is creating art. It's like, wow, look.
I mean, he really is a giant ogre of a man. Like I saw him walking into Capitol Hill. I was like, holy fuck, like this is a big dude.
He doesn't know how to dress properly either, does he?
Well, none of that bothers me, frankly. I think they should all just dress like normal schlubs that they are.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. None of that bothers me. But what does bother me, just very bluntly, is that I think Joe Biden is ruining his brand. The brand is to be against malarkey, and here he is tolerating a lot of malarkey from the Israelis.
Oh yeah,
and I know he doesn't believe any of this shit because I've read enough and studied Joe Biden enough to know that he knows the score with Netanyahu, but he gives a speech and he does all this bullshit stuff, and I wish he would just publicly be like, yeah, these things are fucked up. Now, in defense of Joe Biden, okay, one could make the case about all this armament stuff, that is a deterrent against other players in the region potentially taking advantage of the instability, right? That could be like the argument you could make, and I wouldn't dissuade you from that argument.
That's fair.
But we need to just be honest about like what's going on in Israel, and it is a civil rights issue, right? Like if we're treating Arabs like this, it harms us, reputationally around the world, because people can always point out that we are hypocrites on these issues, right? Like we don't really believe in human rights for Palestinians at all in the United States, and this is just a reality of like being an American right now. It's like we have a Palestinian exception clause to all the things that we say that we believe.
It's really a Jewish exception clause. I mean,
Well, yeah,
let's be honest here. It's not, if some other group were doing this to the Palestinians, Joe might come out in their defense.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really a chosen people. You're special. The Bible is real, guys. Like that's all this is. And it's like, I guess my take on it is, I don't support Hamas. I don't necessarily support even the dreams of a Palestinian state or something. It's just not really my issue. But like, this is clearly fucking with American foreign policy. Like we're involved in it, and it's like the way against it is not actually direct attack. It's like the power of Judaism is the Torah. Like the power of Judaism is values, you could say. It's the mystery
It's
of
not
the
the
religion, the fact
legalistic
that no one
interpretation, you
understands
don't
it.
think?
What?
The legalistic interpretation, like of the Talmud, more like modern Judaism could be attributed to.
This is Cope, Christian Cope stuff. It's the Talmud, guys. No, it's the Torah. Actually, it's the book that you claim is holy, and
They got the whole Old Testament.
Well, yeah, the whole Old Testament is holy writ, but it's the Torah especially. But it's like it's the values, it's the mystery of it, the fact that no one understands what their religion is about, really. So it's a mystery religion, and so it operates on people's minds psychologically. And so I think the only lasting attack is psychological. Like a physical attack, you're going to lose. It's not. It's probably immoral in most cases. It's this and that. But like to bring down the whole thing. I mean, that's what I'm after. Like, don't just criticize them for human rights violation. Like, we need to achieve deicide. And I'm sorry if I'm getting a little too dark here, but I am in dark mode as I announced. Like we need to.
Handling the guinea pigs, saying some dark stuff. I mean, about ending.
The guinea pigs.
I mean, look,
are safe.
I don't think that's how it works, right?
We
like,
need
I
to
think
go after Yahweh. We need to go after Yahweh.
Yeah, I don't think it works that way.
And you Christians, you are worshiping Him, whether you like it or not, or whether you think of it that way or not. That is what you are doing. So we need to go to the source, to the ultimate root of the matter, and uncover it and reveal it to sunlight, which it doesn't like because it's a phonic God. Yahweh is absolutely a phonic God. He's identified by Romans who understood all this stuff. Vulcan, Dionysus, etc. We need to reveal the roots of the problem, air it to sunlight, and just let him die.
Maybe we should just destroy the rest of the temple.
Well, that would be counterproductive because then that would be some weird prophecy. Yeah, they would be like, oh, it's destroyed again, and it's coming back, whatever. Just air it out, let sunlight disinfect it, and like
no, listen, I've met enough of these like ultra Orthodox Jews in my day to know that like when I talk to them, it's like they think of me as a talking cow, right? Like they don't regard me as a human in quite the same way that they regard themselves as human, right? And they'll be honest. Like the nicer ones among them will actually be honest about it, and they'll be like, "Yeah, we don't really regard you as human." And I'm like, oh, "Okay, thanks, man." I mean, I actually think that like we need just a counterintelligence sweep.
I think they're human beings. I wouldn't return the favor on that. They're clearly human beings, but they just express this like childhood quality of the human species.
No, I don't think they actually have that view. I mean, just to be blunt about it, talking to them and dealing with them and hearing how they talk about the Palestinians. I mean, you and I are in a lot of right wing circles. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
There's a lot of basically like disgusting language about Palestinians and about blacks and about other groups, and about Goy. And like this is the reality that they you can't believe of yourself as a chosen people and not have a sense of racism, right? And a sense
Right.
of like, otherizing others. I mean, this is what it is.
Yeah.
And I think we need to just be mindful that this is a cult, and this is a cult that needs to be destroyed. In my view, just being blunt about it. And the best way to destroy the cult is to cut off support to it financially, which would involve like not giving Israel as much aid. It would involve like making sure that the extent that the cult interferes in our politics through their lobbies or what have you, that we shut it down. And every time an American president like tries to fight this, whether it's George Herbert Walker Bush, they threaten him with assassination, or whether it's JFK, they maybe actually assassinate him, right? So there's like a long history of this, and I think we need to just be like aware that this is a cult. This is the final boss of the American experiment, and I think it's time, just to be honest about it.
Yeah. It's time for it to end.
Yeah.
It's time for it to. It had about a 2,500-year history. I don't believe all this. It goes back to the Bronze Age or something. I think it was probably the Bible was probably mostly written in. I don't know. There's an instance. There's a mention of Jews by one of Aristotle's pupils. I believe this is like 375 BC. So, and he mentioned them in Syria, and he mentioned them as a philosopher class, and he says that they invented burnt offerings, human sacrifice, and animal sacrifice. He might have been exaggerating there, but I think it's younger. I mean, I was thinking about this, like all of this stuff is a lot younger than you imagine. I think the final like compilation of the Pentateuch took place through the Greek language in Alexandria and in the Septuagint, and I think it's all very recent, but it's had like 2.5 millennium of power, and it's just time to move on. The Christians mostly don't actually believe in any of this stuff. And the fundamentalists, they kind of pick and choose. They're ultimately, cafeteria fundamentalists. They'll pick and choose this and that from the Bible. The notion that like the Bible taught us morality or something, like this slander, this just outrageous notion that like morality wasn't practiced throughout the ancient world, etc., that like the Jews created it or something, is just so ridiculous. It's just so easily debunked. And it's like, it's time to move on. It's time to move on from this God. This God is dead. It's dead he's been dead for a while in the minds of educated people who have fully entered modernity and recognized the implications of this. But as Nietzsche said, I mean, the Buddha can die, but his shadow can remain in the cave for centuries. And I think we're kind of living in the shadow of Judeo-Christianity. But I think maybe if there is some silver lining to this, and I certainly don't support, I'm not justifying like the murder of children or anything, but if there is a silver lining to the Gaza bombardment and invasion, it is the just final end to this, where it just totally loses legitimacy. Because I mean, Charles, you always think in terms of like funding and networks and whatever. I am the idealist in the sense that like it's all like all of that funding only occurs because of these ideas, and it's gonna there's always gonna be dark money and whatever, but it's like the sinews of that exist because of people's belief in the Bible. And so we've got to go to the heart. We've got to just like kill Yahweh. We've got to just like rip that heritage, that Christian heritage. But like, we need to just rip it out of the minds of men, and it's going to hurt. And people are going to hate us for this. They're going to, we're terrible, we're heretics, or whatever. But I'm sure a Civil War soldier who had gangrene on his leg hated his doctor when he cut his leg off. But at the end of the day, that's what you have to do. You have to sever the limb. You have to just go for it and do something for the long term. And so I just think there needs to be a sustained, theological, historical, philosophical attack on Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Just a vicious, though entirely idealistic, but a absolutely vicious attack that goes for the throat. You can't just allow it to continue to exist. You can't just be like, oh, well, there's so much good there. No. This you've got to kill the beast. It has to be confronted directly. So we need to go after the values that undergird this, the values that undergird conservatism and the Republican Party. We need to go after them at the root in the most vicious manner possible, which is ultimately an idealistic and theological manner. Like, God isn't quite dead. His shadow is still on the cave. And so we've got to finish the job if the human race is going to move on from this, move on from the savagery we're seeing, but ultimately move to a higher level of civilization, which is only possible once we leave Judaism, Islam, Christianity behind. Thus spoke Zarathustra.
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No, sorry, Richard.
Well, surely
I don't
that
know,
would
man.
spark some sort of conversation.
I don't know. I mean, lots of people have been trying to kill them Jews, and they keep coming back like a bad case of herpes. And lots of people have been trying to put an end to Christianity, and it still keeps coming back. So I don't know. I think the problem is much more acute than that. I can hear you. Can you hear me, Richard?
You probably switch over
Richard,
from
can you hear
Wi-Fi
me?
to
I don't think Chuck can hear you.
Wi-Fi to network.
I can hear Richard.
No, Chuck can hear you. You can't hear Chuck, maybe.
Yeah, drop down and come back up, and we'll hear about how you're going to end all the religions.
Well, Chuck, very quickly, the Azeri-Armenian genocide in Nagorno-Karabakh, that was overlooked too because of the Azeri-Israeli ties, perhaps as well. I don't know.
People come back. They get kicked. They get genocided. They get their ass kicked. They come back. It's not a big deal. Like, life moves on. Different populations move around the earth. Some people get population transferred. It's not a big deal. It happens.
Yeah, I just have I guess a different question, and that is, how much of Richard's maybe misplaced anger is actually aimed at dispensationalists instead of Christians, since there's really there's many different factions within Christianity, and I think to paint such a broad brush and then to say we're going to move past the great religions, and I guess he's going to push something like atheism, and maybe we'll have a great leap forward
No,
and
he wants to
kill
create
a
his
lot
own.
of our population.
He wants to have his own cult in which you're all members worshiping Richard. That's the ultimate plan.
No. I don't.
No?
I don't actually
Richard,
want that.
Richard and the guinea pigs. That's the plan.
the golden guinea pig. Yeah.
It
Yeah,
does sound like a good band name, Richard and the Guinea Pigs. Like, they could play
totally.
classic rock covers.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Hootie and the Blowfish cover.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think there's something kind of just much more problematic here, much more down to earth, which is that we've allowed a group of people that have nothing in common with us, that hate us, to run the world.
and it's not working out for us. We need a divorce from Israel. You know?
Yeah, I think I might disagree with you a little bit. I think we have some commonalities in terms of religion, some commonalities in
Do you
terms of
see? Do you
culture.
see? You're just the whole attack on dispensationalism is just a cope. You know, it's like, oh, there's some bad. You believe all the same things dispensationalists believe. Fundamentally,
Well, what do I believe? I'm not a dispensationalist.
you are a worshiper of Yahweh. Okay, like I don't know where.
I believe in God, but
Oh,
the God of the Old Testament is quite a bit different.
what denomination are you?
I would consider myself independent.
All right. Well, you're just coming up with something, and you're claiming to be a true Christian. It's a fallacy. I mean, like, I'm sorry, but Protestants and Catholics both hold to the sacredness of the Holy Bible. I mean, you're just coping. You're claiming you're some
Yeah, but you see,
Gnosticism,
this
like,
is the
oh,
problem.
it's a
This
different
is the
God in the
problem.
Old
This
Testament
is
or
the
whatever. It's the
problem of
same
taking on
God.
this religion thing. This is the problem, is that nobody actually reads the book.
Yeah.
You know, like this is the problem. The problem in general is that you have these charlatans that pop up and they get a bunch of followers and they say, oh, this is what this says in subsection B6, B whatever, in the book of blah, blah, whatever, the holy mountain of blah. And that's what they say. And people are like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like, let's go to coffee hour and talk about how Carol's cheating on Bob. Like that. I mean, that's church in the United States of America right now. Like I'm sorry, it just is what it is. And like I go to church every Sunday. That's what it is, okay?
But
And
that's
people want to be
redeemable.
told.
See,
They want to
the
be
people.
told. They want to be told. Like there's so many people out there who don't want to think. They want to go to church. They want to like look good, whatever. They want to look like preachy-ish. They want to go there. They want to like feel good about themselves. And then they want to go to coffee hour and they want to talk about how Bob is cheating on Carol. And like this is how it is in America. Like
But that's redeemable.
nobody actually believes any of this shit.
Yeah, but
Okay?
see, this is redeemable precisely because it's not actually Christian. Like everyone needs some sort of community, and
No, no,
that
no, no, no.
gossip comes with
Like
that.
if you look, you and I mean, I was raised. I mean, look, I bounced around these different religions over the years, right? Basically, because I was pursuing a woman, which is the one true faith. Um, for each of these religions that I was a part of. And let me just be real with you. They're all kind of the same, like in the Christian faith, whatever, fine. You go to like you hang out, you like whatever, you like pretend to read the Bible, you sing some songs, you try not to look at all the hotties in church and try not to think about them, and whatever they might be doing before or after church. Like that's basically like church for most men. Like it's just basically how it is. And then you'll have some problems in your life, like Susan will get cancer, or like Jim's business will fail. And then you go there and you're like really sad and you're really upset, and maybe they put hands on you to heal you or whatever, but probably not. And like you'll sing from the book of you'll read from the book of Common Prayer, do the Nicene Creed, blah 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 blah, right? And like life goes on. The point isn't like fighting that and fighting like the whole like whatever Christian whatever. Like all of that's fine. You can do all that, whatever. Take on your Yahwehism, blah blah blah. But like the truth of the matter is like there are real bullets being sent right now by the U.S. government to the Israelis to kill a bunch of Palestinians, and like that is real life. Like that is like very real. And that's where we are when we talk about these things.
Well, I know, but like the casual Christianity that you described, which I will fully admit is like much more redeemable than fundamentalism or something. And even
No,
fundamentalism
but
has
even
some redeeming
go to a
quality that
fundamental.
sustains all of this stuff. Like even
Eh,
if they're hypocritical, they're paying respect
no, because
to
you
this
can always
basic
find
worldview.
you can always find a subsection B6 on paragraph 7 that contradicts all. Like, oh, we forgot totally about this part of the Book of Common Prayer, And like it turns out that we shouldn't treat the Palestinians badly because Jesus said so. Like there's always every book, everything is subject to
But why hasn't
interpretation.
it turned out that way? Like
Well, first of all, it has. Like if you look at if you look at like the different churches over time, they've had different positions on Israel. I mean, if you look at the Church of England has moved like virulently anti-Israel, almost to like a
yeah,
kind
but
of.
Zionism wouldn't have taken place if it weren't for Anglo Protestants. I'll say this as a why.
No, I
I
don't
can
think
criticize.
so. I think actually what happened.
Disagree.
I think actually what happened was a whole bunch of people in the waning days of the British Empire were being assassinated by a bunch of criminal Jews, and a lot of people are like, "Fuck it, like let's just leave."
I'm talking long before Balfour.
Yeah, but
There were Christians who
eh,
brought this midwife to this. Like you can say all this stuff, but it's merely hypothetical because
no, I don't think that's
we are
exactly
where we
right.
are.
No, I think there's a lot more fighting that took place on these issues, and there's also a lot of
I don't
people who
doubt that,
there's
but
also a lot
who
of people who
won?
wanted criminal Jew money, and they said that they were Zionists, and so they got criminal Jew money. I mean,
Well,
Churchill
God
himself.
works in mysterious ways, but like we are where we are because of this.
You know how many politicians that I've encountered over the years who will just tell me that they don't give a fuck about Israel, but the reason they do it is because it's just easier to just take their money and like give a speech or
Why
whatever.
is there money for them to take?
Because
Like
they're a
you're
criminal.
it's a
Because they're a
series of
criminal.
begging
Because they're a
questions.
criminal syndicate. Because there's a whole bunch of Jews that are spread around the world, and they engage in a lot of criminal behavior, like raising the rents on people. They tend to be relatively smart relative to their host population, and they engage in all kinds of blacklists and defamation and all the rest of it. And they rule people as a small group and in a predatory manner. This is like this is just a reality of.
Where did this ability come from? I mean, you're just begging questions, one
Well, where
after
did it
another.
come from? I mean, it came from their sense of chosenness, obviously, but it also came from
Thus, it
like,
came from the Bible.
well, on some level, yeah, but it also came from just their behavior. I mean, there's a
I
lot of
mean,
them now. I mean, look, there's lots of criminal Jews out there that are perfectly secular, you know?
but they're not.
Well,
I mean,
okay.
outside of like petty criminals, I'm sure there's some lapsed Jews, if
No, I mean,
criminal
like
or
look at
fine.
how I mean, look
Say
at
that about
how a lot
anyone.
of the Silicon Valley people behave, or the private equity people behave, or like just look at how they actually behave. Like, what are their actual practices? They
And
promote
are those
themselves.
Silicon Valley people you're referencing? Are they supporting Israel or not?
They're supporting Israel,
And
of course.
name
Yeah.
one seriously religious prime minister of Israel. I can't really think of one.
Who said that?
I
Jeremy
did.
said that. No, I mean Jeremy's right. I mean, there's not a single one of them that actually believe any of this
You
shit.
don't think Ben Gurion believed
No, of
in
course not.
God?
Yeah, to some extent, but it was main.
You're just
No, he
Jeremy. I
believed
love
in
you,
the
brother.
political
You're just trying
project.
to save the religion. You've got to cast. I mean,
No, it's not a
horrible
religion thing.
metaphor.
It's a political
You've got to
project.
throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like you can't have your religion and pretend that it has no effect on this.
I agree with
I
you.
mean,
I
are
agree
you a
with you.
practicing
No,
Jew?
you're correct, Richard, in terms of the way that it is supported, especially in Christian Zionism. There is a very strong biblical piece to that. And when you then
Okay,
tie
but
in,
Jeremy, we're gonna have to blame the Jews at some point.
no,
Like, give
of
me a
course,
break.
I
If
of
we, if
course,
if we can't blame the Jews for Zionism, then what are we
no,
going to do? I mean, we can't blame them for any. They're totally innocent. I mean, it's
no, that's not
like
what I was saying.
you're trying to save the religion and pretend that
No,
it's
it's
not
not that.
like
I'm just
directly
no,
implicated
no,
in
no.
it.
I agree that it's directly implicated, definitely in terms of the chosenness, the tribal aspect, and I don't think it's all marketing that Netanyahu brings up, you know, the Isaiah and smiting Amalek and all of that. That I don't believe that's
Right.
all marketing, but it definitely also is marketing.
Okay, but you can only sell something to someone if it does fulfill a desire. Like if I were to create a spaghetti monster religion right now, it probably wouldn't really go anywhere unless it appealed to a kind of pre-existing psychology. So it's like, even if I granted you that like these prime ministers weren't truly religious or something, which I don't agree with, but even if I were to grant you that, we're still stuck at this point of like, what is motivating Zionism? And like, I get it, there's oil in the Middle East, I get it, American empire, I get it, there are all these kind of other causes. It's just ignoring the fundamental cause, which is that it's promised to Abraham in Genesis. I mean, it's just like, what? Oh, do Christians out there, do they not believe Genesis? Is Brennan our one true Scotsman here? Does he believe that Genesis is like heretical or something?
Well, I mean, Israel switches from kind of like the, Jewish people or whatever in the land to kind of the body of Christ, Christians in the New Testament. So, I mean, there's just a bunch of misunderstandings. And this is kind of what was important about that guy asking you about like dispensationalists.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Richard's
Talking point right
making
now.
Richard's
Dispensationalism is the big talking point that everybody's like leaning on, because the dispensationalism gives them a way out from Christianity having some sort of effect on the whole thing, right?
it's not that, Charles. It's more that many people view dispensationalism as heretical. And it's kind of like thinking about Christianity itself may have gotten infected by this thing that says things that are blatantly unchristian. So there are
This is my
evangelical
point, Richard.
preachers.
This is
There are
my point.
evangelical preachers that will say things like all the Jews are going to go to heaven regardless of what they do, and they'll make these sweeping statements that are anti-Christian. But that is
Yeah, I mean, many of them are on.
dispensationalist.
Many of them have been
Where
on the
does
table.
salvation come from?
I mean, many of them have been on the table.
Did Jesus ever say anything about where salvation comes from?
Yeah, he does.
Where does it come from?
You talking about by what?
Yeah. What people? Where does, when he mentions this at a well, where does salvation come from?
Well, he says there is no way to the Father except through me.
Yeah.
So that's so most Christians believe
salvation comes from the Jews is the line I was fishing for. But
well,
I mean,
no, Paul. There's extensive verses in the New Testament about how the Jews actually haven't been faithful, and therefore there's new branches being grafted in. But what's kind of interesting to me
it's 2.0. I mean, Jesus died as a Jew.
Well, keep in mind that
he died.
If you think of the word Jew, I think Jew is misnomer though, because if you think of
this is just one ridiculous cope after another.
Well,
I mean,
let's get on it though.
He's crucified as King of the Jews.
He's crucified as King of the Jews, but
yes.
Well, that's more of a very, very modern take on it. Because
that's in the book of John.
But okay, so let's go back a little bit. Okay, most of the things that we read these days have been changed over time. Okay, one of the big changes is in the past, people didn't use the word Jew. Okay, in the past it was the Israelites, the Hebrew, or aka the Hebrew people. Okay.
Well, there's a tribe of Judah.
Well, it's a tribe, but
Jew comes from.
It is, but whenever the Northern Kingdom fell for their apostasy, it's just the word Jew itself is an attempt to cloak themselves in morality by using that word. You know what I'm saying? So I don't necessarily ascribe to the use of that word by a group of people who may not be that actually closely connected to the ancient Israelites. Okay, and what I say, there's many references about
they're all
genetic distance.
They're all Khazarians, bro.
Right. So in terms of genetic distance, we know who's closest to the ancient Israelites. The ancient Israelites, the closest descendants are the Palestinian Christians, the Samaritans, the Syrian Christians, and the Lebanese Christians. And many of them converted over, and then they didn't intermarry because of the fact that when Islam took over, they were isolated. Now, some of them did convert and become Muslim, but there's a huge amount of genetic distance between those people and the Ashkenazi Jews. Okay, so the
Right.
Ashkenazi Jews, I think, have a huge amount of genetic distance because they're very far removed.
Well, they're European.
By the way,
I mean, they're 50% European.
and Plutonia messaged me. They want to come up and speak on.
Okay, so whenever you think of the word Ashkenazi, though, what is Ashkenaz? What is it a reference to?
I don't know.
Okay, I'll tell you. It's actually a reference to the sons of the three sons of Noah. Okay, so the three sons of Noah, one of them was Japheth,
right?
And Ashkenaz was one of his sons. Okay, so it's kind of strange the word anti-Semite being used by Ashkenazi Jews who are themselves from the line of Japheth.
Japheth
being used.
Well, there's Ham, Shem, and Japheth, but Japheth is the European. That's the European people. They're talking
exactly.
about you.
But that's what I'm saying. Ashkenazi Jews are. How could you be from the line of Shem yet be Ashkenazi? Do you understand? It
right.
begs
Ham
the question.
But there's also a desert translation for Shemitic, so meaning also Levant languages, cultures, religions. And what's very interesting is if we look at our current anti-Semitism czar, Deborah Lipstadt, who basically is a longtime fundee of Jeffrey Epstein's godfather, Les Wexner. She has a whole chapter in her book about the difference between anti-Semitism without a hyphen and then anti-Semitism with a hyphen. And she and they, the Zionists, use anti-Semitism without the hyphen as a modern reference to sort of German anti-Jewishness, basically. So you're correct in terms of this more ancient breakdown of Shem and that aspect of Shemitic. But even that, then you can imagine that Ashkenazi Jews who ascribe to some aspect of that biblical culture could still be called "quote unquote" Shemitic. But in general, the whole term obviously is just another Zionist occupied colony.
Well, I do believe that there's a lot of things that people don't understand about the Old Testament, and so to address some of Richard's comments and go back a little bit, if you think about and read about the Old Testament and what were the reasons for the flood, Richard, do you understand what the reasons for the flood were?
Yes, degeneracy.
No, not degeneracy. Keep on going.
Falling away from Yahweh.
No. Okay.
What?
So there's a few different interpretations, but the most common one, and the one that's the ancient interpretation, is actually that from the Book of Enoch, which it is quoted in the Bible. The Watchers, aka angels, came down and had children with women, creating giants, and that is alleged to be the source of our god myths, among other different things. Okay, so with this happening, then that spread this kind of scourge.
Actually, are you going where I think you're going? Like
I'm going exactly there. I'm going exactly there.
We're the actual giants. We're the Jews.
No, I'm going to. There was a purge.
I'm a Jew.
At that point.
Excited.
So I do not believe in Christian identity, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah.
So there was a purge at that point because if all of humanity's DNA was corrupted, then there could be no savior. Okay. So that happened, and in effect, the earth was repopulated after that. And then later on, the very same thing that happened with the Watcher started to happen again. And where did it happen? Primarily, among other different locations, was Canaan. And that's where you get the resurgence of giants. And, I thought about it for a long time. What's the fundamental reason for the order around, total genocide against some of the populations in Canaan? And the genetic corruption, I think, is one of the best explanations.
So you're talking about God destroyed. He caused the flood. You're picking up on the Nephilim. I don't think you need the Book of Enoch for that, and that's
Well,
in Genesis.
you don't need it, but that's what the Book of Enoch is specifically about, and it's more of that story.
Yeah, when people began to multiply in the face of the ground and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that they were fair, and they took wives for themselves of all that they chose. So this sons of God, would you think of these as angels?
Yes.
Okay. So angels were attracted to mortals, and the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went into the daughters of humans who bore children to them. These were the heroes that were of old, warriors of renown. The Lord saw that the wickedness of humankind was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made humankind on this earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So you're associating the first paragraph with some kind of corruption of the bloodline, but I mean, so are you suggesting that God doesn't like race mixing or something? I mean, is this
No. That's
But they
more
were
of
corrupted with angels. I mean,
okay. Well, there's another reference to that in the Bible too, and that is whenever Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. That was also another example of a situation where there was
these angels came down who were very attractive,
right.
And I guess it's Lot has to fend people off from raiding his home, and he's saying, "Oh, here, take my daughter instead." I mean, it's a very bizarre passage.
Right. But it there's also a reference to strange flesh, abominations, those kind of things, and things that particularly anger God. That being one of them.
But these are the angels. I mean, it's not like these are devils. They're said sons of God. So I would presume these are
sons of
angels.
God is a generic term. Is a generic term that that describes members of the spirit realm. Really.
Can we get a bit more, in the last few millennia here when we talk about this stuff?
I was hoping we were going to get some white Hebrew
I don't mean to be
Israelites.
rude or anything. I'm just reading. I'm reading some Martin Luther right now. I'm just reading what Martin Luther thought about the Jews. I'm reading various things of that sort.
I have that book.
Yeah, just kind of on the Jews and their lies.
Yeah, I've got it on my
1543.
shelf.
I don't know.
By the way, Donica says that she's requesting. Can you bring her up?
Why am I bringing her up?
Hey Charles,
did you see that wanted to talk on us or something?
Did you see the Pope called for a ceasefire?
Yeah, because the Pope is fucking awesome. The Pope is the man.
So what do you think the papists have to say about this whole conflict?
Well, I went to it's funny you mentioned that. So I went with a friend of mine to Catholic Mass because he's like very worried about me right now because he thinks I'm becoming an Anglican again. And so he's on me, he's on me like a fat man on a ham sandwich, and he's worried about my soul and all the rest of this. And so I was like, what the fuck, whatever, I'll go, and then we'll go and have coffee hour and talk about how Bob is fucking cheating on Carol or whatever. And so anyway, so I went with him, and we were and the priest like looks directly at me, and he says, we're praying for peace in the Holy Land. Right? No mention of Israel, no mention. And I was just thinking to myself, like, the Catholics, like the real Catholics, are not so keen on the Jews and how they misbehave in different ways. And Pope Francis is obviously a part of that tradition that goes way, way, way back. And so, I'm heartened to see it. I also, you know, the other King Charles had some great remarks on these issues back when he was, Prince Charles, and I ascribe to that position wholeheartedly about how the American Jews are the big problem on these issues, because look, the reality is that like a lot of American Jews don't have to live like in Israel, so they try to like have a say on all of this stuff. And it's really kind of disgusting that they try to like run this country from Malibu or whatever. But you read that 1986 letter from Prince Jews, or from Prince Charles, excuse me,
Prince Jews.
Prince Jews. Whoops, Prince Charles. He blames foreign Jews for the Middle East troubles, and he talks about a Jewish lobby, and he says that they're responsible for all this stuff.
And it does make you wonder who whacked Princess Diana and then tried to blame it on the royals. It sounds sort of similar to 9/11 and George Bush,
It sounds
actually.
100% just like that.
Wow.
And I don't know, and they tried to make it like, Princess Diana marrying a Muslim man. Who would have been offended by that? Do you think the royal family would have gotten off their tufts and like assassinated him? Or do you think like maybe there's a bunch of Jews that would be unhappy about having Princess Diana marry a Muslim? I don't know.
And
Guys.
also, and it does sound like the king moving towards his Arab coalition and the Palestinians. You could have seen Diana moving in that direction in terms of her human rights work. So,
yeah,
100%.
We Spencers are kind of nuts. I have
Yes,
to
you
say.
are. Yes, you
Like,
are.
Of the same family, Richard,
not
generally?
as a whole. Not as a whole. I mean, generally, I guess distantly, but not as a whole. But then, like, we really produce. We like produce Diana Spencer, Leonard Spencer Churchill, Richard Spencer. Like, we put out our fair share of fanatics. I think it's fair to say.
I just,
you can be an honorary Jew, Richard. I'll accept you.
This is him. I mean, Prince Charles. It is the influx of foreign European Jewry which has helped to cause great problems.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, man.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just calling it like I see him. And then he says, where is it? I know there are so many complex issues, but how can there ever be an end to terrorism unless causes are eliminated? Here he is. He's preaching your line, Richard. He continued, suggesting that the immigration of Jews could be, blah, 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 to the state of Israel could be perceived as a direct cause of the continuation of the conflict. Surely some U.S. president has to have the courage to stand up and take on the Jewish lobby in the United States. After previously stating that he never realized the Arabs see Israel as a U.S. colony. Blah, blah, blah. The Jews got mad at him for writing this letter, even though it was true. Blah, blah, blah. They say it's because it's not true, but it's really they're mad because it is true. And then, I mean, that's basically like what we have here, friends. It is what it is.
And even the Balfour Declaration had in what the Zionists in the modern day like rail against as human rights and that whole agenda when there's all targeting the UN. I mean, it was written in there as a part of the deal with the British Empire was to not, undo the natural rights of the other people that were there.
Hmm. Hey, Charles, I am going to actually have to go because I
No
need to
problem,
do a
Richard.
few things before I go to
Yeah,
sleep.
yeah, you have to
And
cancel Christianity. I understand.
well,
Go,
right,
go,
that's
go feed your guinea pigs.
I'm going to
Cancel
press the
Christianity.
button on my
You know,
desk. Yeah.
stay warm in
Ri-
Montana. Do all
Ri-
that.
Richard, check out this book that I linked up here, From Yahweh to Zion by Laurent Guyonneau, which I think will be up your alley to understand maybe the psychotheology of Jewish theology and tribalism as
This,
it's
by
been
the way,
worked.
this rabbi I know gave me a copy of that book.
Wow, very
Yeah,
interesting.
this Chabad rabbi that I know gave me a copy of that book.
Fascinating.
Very, very interesting indeed. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, look, I think you're basically correct on the main that if you want to get rid of this stuff, you have to kind of attack the root causes. But that, of course, implies that people can actually think about root causes,
True.
or that we should try to like propagandize the hoi polloi. I think we should just dictate the terms. We're the most powerful country in the history of the world. Like, get fucked, BB. Like, that's what and maybe when Prince Charles is saying that there needs to be a U.S. president to stand up to the Jewish lobby, maybe that's Joe Biden. Maybe the king and the president, might be on the same page on this stuff.
Maybe Joe Biden, he's gotten the memo because there are moves to remove him. It's looking really bad. They're protesting the White House, pushing up against the gates. Maybe he'll just be like, "All right, I've got to drastically change course here."
Maybe he will he'll use Israeli policies on targeted killing against Israelis.
Are you talking about JFK?
No, I mean Joe Biden. JFK tried to solve this, but he got his brains blown out.
Hmm.
No, but I think Charles is talking about that the Israelis were the ones who led in drone warfare, actually, and targeted assassinations before the Americans took it
Correct.
on. By the way, the Israelis were also deeply involved in the contractors who were involved in Abu Ghraib and torture, and this is all based on Israeli psychology about the so-called understanding of the Arab mind and how it only understands humiliation and violence and all of this. So that's very, very Israeli psychology that the entire country has been indoctrinated in post 9/11.
Yeah, I mean, we live in a very Israeli world, right? I mean, we live in a very Likud, Facebook-heavy world. Like a lot of our technologies come from, things that they've stolen from us and repackaged in different ways. Yeah, I mean, we have real problems in this country that come from importing the occupation into our society, 100%. And if we're not willing to call these things honestly, I mean, the IDF trains our military to treat blacks as Palestinians in our inner city. Like, it is what it is. And like, they make no secret of it. They boast about it. Like, we only know about the nature of Arnon Milchan's treason, treachery, because he was bragging about it sitting next to Robert De Niro on Israeli TV, where he was just talking about being an Israeli spy stealing our nuke secrets. And because we're not willing to have real conversations about counterintelligence, about the ways we make ourselves vulnerable to Israeli espionage, all because which is very difficult for people to really talk about. And it's difficult because we have Jewish privilege in this country, or Israeli privilege, I should say. And I think it's going to ultimately kill us all if we don't get it sorted. But my sense is that Joe Biden, my sense is that Joe Biden is probably like, fuck it, let's go. My sense is that he may actually be the man for the hour. I'm willing to give him another month. He is old.
That's a lot of Palestinians.
Well, fortunately, I'm not a Palestinian.
Unfortunately, Palestinians are Palestinians, though.
No, but the point I'm making is that, like, if Joe Biden eliminates Netanyahu as a strategic threat to the United States, it's unfortunate that there's going to be a lot of dead Palestinian children. And obviously, we'd like to see the correct number of dead Palestinian children is 0. But if it takes him a month to get it done, then it takes him a month to get it done. Wish that it were sooner. Wish that it were done years ago. Wish that they had like heeded
Before they killed our president. Yeah, definitely.
yeah. I mean, you and I have been talking about this subject for years now, right? I mean, like this is not. We are old hands at this sort of thing, sir. Like, are we not? Like, and the world is seeing
True.
the Israel conflict from our vantage point these days, increasingly. Like, we are not things that I'm finding it quite thrilling to be moderate on some of these issues, like watching some of these things. I was having a lovely Mexican restaurant the other day when a number of people recognized me as I was having Mexican food and came up to me and thanked me for the things I had said against the Israelis. So like that would never have happened like 5-10 years ago. So I think things are moving in a very interesting direction. And I'm sort of heartened by that, but it does seem to me like maybe Joe Biden's the man for the job. I think the strategy of hugging the Israelis, bear hugging them, has just been absolutely ridiculous. We should have just made it very clear that Bibi is not to be tolerated. The Ben Gvir government. I mean, come on, really?
Yeah, the terrorist insider.
Yeah, I mean, and then of
Who's
course, how did
very
their
likely
government?
involved in the Rabin incitement too.
That's right. And and then you look at just like the reality of how they deploy Pegasus against us in our own country. And like that makes them a present threat to the United States. If I'm not secure in my communications because the Israelis are hacking my phone and fucking with my businesses, then like yeah, they got to go.
Yeah, I mean, now that we've had, like, as Justin Amash was pointing out about the AUMF after 9/11, said nothing about Al Qaeda. It said about anybody who was a conspirator in 9/11. And now the same very likely conspirator of 9/11 has just killed his family. That's a pretty that should be a diplomatic crisis to have a former congressman's family being directly murdered by the guy who's credibly suspected of having done 9/11.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And what are we going to do about it? Fuck all. That's the real crying shame about it. And the truth of the matter is, the policy of having the Israelis clean out their own trash led to Netanyahu and Israeli military intelligence, which he's clearly a member. It led to him basically doing a coup of the system there, and basically targeting all these people so that government collapsed. He could come back into power. And what do you know? He doesn't want to go to jail, so he's using all the technological means at his disposal to stay in power for forever. And he will kill anyone who stands in his way. Because this is the nature. This is just kind of the nature of how these things go, right? Like, if you have a system like pattern off of the Weimar Constitution, you lead to these small groups of these small political parties, forming alliances and effectively blackmailing people until they get enough, support. And that's kind of where we are right now. I mean, you talk to the settlers and the settler political parties, and they're well aware that Netanyahu's a criminal, and they find it a feature, not a bug. Like, they like it. They use it as a way of blackmailing him to get the various policies that they want through.
Yeah, and
You
then
mentioned
also
Weimar Republic, Chuck, and look who shows up, Kaiser.
Yeah, well, Kaiser, I was watching The Lives of Others the other day, and I thought of you. What a wonderful film. But a bit ahistoric, right? The idea that the Stasi would be punished with like meaningless jobs. All the Stasi people ended up taking over the German economy, real estate agents, all that good stuff. But anyway, it's a good film. Anyway, my point, the point I'm trying to make, right, is like we just don't have to deal with this bullshit anymore. We just don't. We don't have to live like this. And I think the first political leader in the United States that imagines a post-Bibi world or even a post-Israel world is going to be speaking truth to power in a way that I think people are not ready for yet, but which they need. I mean, This is Nelson Mandela, and the ANC taking over from apartheid South Africa. Like this, there's a moment that needs to happen here, where we basically just say no, like enough is enough, like no more Jewish state. Sorry, it's against our values. We wish everyone who lives in Palestine or the the Israeli settlements there, or whatever, wish them all well. We don't want anyone to kill each other, but like, sorry, like there are technologies that are pioneered on Palestinians are being deployed against Americans. Just not acceptable.
Well, that's the tragedy of this moment so far, in terms of that the United States, obviously do have all of the, the leverage to some extent. Obviously, there's some issues in terms of real deep Samson option type of scenarios, or cyber Samson options and stuff like that that I imagine would be implied. But just on the overt surface, we obviously, carry both the carrot and the stick. We must have intelligence about Netanyahu's deep involvement in September 11th, and we really do, have the military power to really leverage a real permanent or perdurable resolution to, what this whole Jewish state thing has become, and the mass global terrorism and the attempted national genocide of the Palestinian people. There are real solutions here, but they're not going to be popular to some extent. They'd be popular with everybody, but not popular with anybody in terms of really doing it. But you're right that we don't yet have, it doesn't look like we have the leader who's willing to go there yet. And my part of the concern too is I don't think we want a South African resolution. There was no real serious resolution to that. They did truth and reconciliation, somehow skipped over accountability and restitution, and thus ended up just sort of replicating a more global financial version of South Africa after apartheid. And so I think that we need to figure out how to create a politics that can transcend party and ideology here, that will take these kinds of like core national security questions very seriously.
So, Charles, I was thinking that we do have some of the politicals that are already obviously speaking out very firmly against the Israelis, but it seems like they're coming from the far left primarily. And I was wondering what your thoughts are. Is that going to prevent that from going mainstream because they're considered so far left?
Yeah, I don't really think in left-right terms typically. It's not really I just don't find them very helpful anymore. So I don't really pay attention to that frame. My view on it just very simply is that, like, it's unfortunate that the Republican Party has become a kind of mafia party. I wish that things would change there. I would love to know what what Chris Christie really thinks of Jared Kushner and Charles Kushner, given that he, put Charles Kushner in jail. So, the problem is that there's just like not a lot of honest talk about the Israel issue on any political party. And I think what's going to happen is the Democratic Party is going to basically be split over the issue. And that'll be unfortunate. But yeah, I wish the Republicans would talk about these things honestly. There used to be Republicans that would talk honestly about them, like George Herbert Walker Bush. But that was a long time ago, I don't know. Maybe Joe Biden will surprise us. I don't know.
Well, sending the weapons doesn't sound like a trend in that direction as far as surprising
Yeah, but
us.
sending the
Sounds like.
weapons, how are the weapons going to be used? Maybe they're
Well,
used to
no, Charles. They're all a type of glide bomb. All of them. They're from a defense company, Rafael, not the French one. It's an Israeli owned and operated one that has a contract with the U.S. and like a manufacturing sector here, Rafael USA, and all of those munitions that Pentagon had procured were going now back to Israel. So they're giving them specifically bombs to bomb the Palestinians with. So not great if you're looking for peace. You're basically, maybe he's trying to get it done, but if that's the case, wouldn't you say no bombs, no more? So I don't know. I think he was probably heavily pressured to do this. But it is what it
Yeah.
is.
And
Yeah.
and it's occupied, it's that seventh floor of the State Department, which has been Zionist occupied for more than 50 years. And that's why I think it is significant and substantial, this like now very public State Department revolt, now that it
I thought it
got
was the
leaked
seventh
out.
floor of the CIA that was very Zionist.
Yes, and maybe it's not the seventh floor of state, but whatever the sort of executive floor of State Department uh, I've heard that you walk in there and basically it's all Jews, all Zionists in terms of the Middle East, and that's where the policy is made from, where you have all these sort of lower level functionaries, long term diplomat types, now
The
going
Madeleine
public.
Albright School. Yeah.
So it's possible maybe there is some revolt going on.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it does seem to me like there's a number of protests that are happening, but I think we should maybe close down the space. Let's maybe pick it up again tomorrow night. Hope everybody has a good day, and we'll
Oh
catch up
wait,
soon.
when are you doing the thing on Shia?
I'm not sure yet. I haven't made a decision yet. When I know, you'll know.